Privacy today is a real and pressing issue, one full of controversy. We have all heard about data breaches, Google reading your emails, or generative AI models being trained on your data without your knowledge or your consent. And these aren't fringe incidents anymore, they are systemic. And they reveal a pattern of disregard for individual autonomy in the digital world. When we hear about these violations, many of us react emotionally, which is very natural. There's a sense of disgust, even a kind of moral outrage, that someone crossed a boundary we assumed was private. And that emotional response has real consequences. People are changing their behavior. More and more are paying attention to their digital footprint today. There is a growing movement toward minimal tech use for encrypted communication and even so-called dumb phones. But what is it exactly that moves us so much about these invasions? Why does it feel like a fundamental violation when someone uses our data without asking? And most importantly, do these tech giants actually have an obligation to respect our privacy? And if so, why? And that's exactly what I want to explore in this video. I'm Nikodem, your local philosopher, and today we are diving into the ethics of digital privacy by looking at three core ideas: the illusion of consent, power asymmetry, and instrumentalization of the human being. Let's start, shall we? Here's the thing. Most of the time, we don't even realize that our privacy has been violated. That's why it shocks us so much when it comes to light. We have an assumption that if something serious were happening with our data, we would know. But in reality, we have consented to many things we are unaware of, usually buried inside some 30-page privacy policy. No one reads those. No one. And sure, the common argument from tech corporation is that you should have read the agreement, that it's your responsibility as a consumer. But this is ethically weak. It's completely unrealistic to expect the average person to parse legal jargon just to use a basic app or a basic device. Worse still, sometimes there isn't even a formal agreement. And a perfect example of that is data scraping, the automated harvesting of publicly available content by bots. For example, generative AIs now scrape the entire internet to train their models. They consume blogs, comments, images, and texts, whatever they can find. So your content, your words, your face, used without ever asking. There are some recent mechanisms to fight back. For instance, Cloudflare, so one of the largest domain infrastructure providers, now gives websites the ability to block AI training bots. That's a good sign actually, but it's still an opt-in measure. And it raises the ethical question still. Do AI developers or tech companies even have the right to learn from us like this, simply because we posted something publicly? Is the line between public and private that thin? If we agree that meaningful consent is nearly impossible in today's ecosystem, then we have to ask, what actually protects our dignity and autonomy in this system? And this brings us to some deeper philosophical questions about the nature of consent itself. What makes consent truly valid? Philosophers have long argued that genuine consent requires three things: knowledge, freedom, and competence. So you need to understand what you are agreeing to, you need to be free from coercion, and you need to have the mental capacity to make that decision. These are the three elements. But look at our digital world through this lens. Do we really have knowledge when terms of service are deliberately opaque? Are we truly free when refusing means being cut off from essential services? And can anyone be considered competent to consent to something so complex that even lawyers struggle to understand it? There's something almost absurd about the whole setup. It's like being asked to sign a contract written in a language you don't speak, for consequences you can't predict, while someone holds a gun to your head. Except the gun is social and economic exclusion, and the contract keeps changing after you have signed it. And I would argue that this isn't just a legal problem, it's a moral crisis. When consent becomes meaningless, we lose something fundamental about human dignity. The very idea that we have a right to make informed choices about our own lives starts to crumble. Power, everyone wants power. There's a quote I like: "If buying isn't owning, then stealing isn't theft." It's a biting take on how tech companies can operate outside of traditional moral and legal norms simply by redefining what ownership and access mean. Tech monopolies hold enormous structural power. They control our communication, our infrastructure, our devices, and increasingly the very flow of information. Why should they treat us as equal partners? What forces them to respect our rights? And the reality is nothing but the law, and even that is often toothless. These companies are experts at dodging responsibility, lobbying regulators, and shaping the legal landscape in their favor. So, do we have any real alternatives? In some areas, yes. For example, you can use a different search engine like DuckDuckGo instead of Google. You can run Linux instead of Mac OS or Windows. You can experiment with open source generative AIs that don't require sending your data to massive servers. But other areas are more or less inescapable. For example, if you own a phone, you are being tracked, always. So even when your GPS is off, your phone pings its location to the nearest cell tower, unless it's in airplane mode. And to actually use your device as intended, so call, text, browse internet, you have to be online, of course, which means someone is watching, always. Your location data gets logged and stored. Of course, authorities often justify this surveillance in the name of crime prevention or national security. But that opens the door to misuse. In authoritarian regimes like Russia, Belarus, or China, location data and digital activity are used not to protect people, but to monitor them. For example, to infiltrate opposition groups, to silence dissent. It's straight up Orwellian. There is also a deeper philosophical angle here. Think of Thomas Hobbes and the social contract. Hobbes lived through the English Civil War in the 17th century, a time of chaos, violence, and uncertainty. From that experience, he developed his famous theory about why we need government at all. Hobbes believed that in the state of nature, before any laws or government, life would be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Because, to put it simply, without rules, everyone would be at war with everyone else. So people agreed to give up some of their natural freedoms to a sovereign authority in exchange for protection and security. That's the social contract. But here is the crucial part. Hobbes was clear that this contract has limits. The sovereign's job, so the leader's job, is to protect the people, not to dominate them. When the government stops serving the people and starts ruling them instead, the contract is broken. Now apply this to our digital world. We have entered into an implicit social contract with tech companies. We give them our data, our attention, of course, our privacy, and in return we get convenience, connection, and endless entertainment. But what happens when they stop serving us and start ruling us instead? When Google can decide what information you see, when Facebook can manipulate your emotions through algorithmic feeds, when Amazon can predict your behavior better than you can, are they still serving you? Or have they become digital sovereigns, ruling over subjects who never consciously agreed to be ruled? Hobbes would have been fascinated by this problem. The power these companies wield is in some ways greater than any government in history. They know more about us than the state ever could. They shape our thoughts, our relationships, our very sense of reality. And unlike democratic governments, we didn't vote for them, and we can't vote them out. This creates what philosophers call a legitimacy crisis. Political power is legitimate when it serves the people's interests and operates with their consent. But what about corporate power that operates without meaningful consent and serves primarily the interests of shareholders? So the ethical question becomes, at what point does the power imbalance become so extreme that these companies have a moral obligation to protect us from themselves? There's a quote I really like, and to be honest, I don't know the author. In the world of goods, man also becomes a mere good. It hits hard, and it captures what's most disturbing about our current situation. The sense that we are not being treated as persons, but as resources. This is the heart of what philosophers call instrumentalization, treating someone as a means to an end, rather than an end in themselves. And it actually violates the core of moral respect. In the digital economy, we aren't users, we are inputs. Our clicks, our preferences, our moods and habits, all mined, measured, and monetized. Here, a Marxian perspective is also useful. Marx argued that under capitalism, labor becomes commodified. Workers don't own what they produce. Their labor is bought and sold like any other commodity. And in that process, they become alienated, not just from their work, but from their own human identity. They become, in his words, mere appendages of the machine. Today, the same logic applies to digital life. We are alienated from our data. It doesn't belong to us. We don't know where it goes, how it's used, or what it's training. We are alienated from ourselves, algorithmically shaped to be predictable, marketable, optimized. We are not just alienated laborers anymore. We are alienated persons. The ethical problem here is deep. What does it mean for human dignity if everything about us is up for grabs? If we are only ever useful and never sacred? And let me bring in another voice here. Herbert Marcuse, a philosopher who saw this coming decades ago. Marcuse was part of the Frankfurt School, a group of thinkers who tried to understand how modern industrial society was changing human consciousness itself. In the 1960s, Marcuse wrote something that feels prophetic today. The people recognize themselves in their commodities. They find their soul in their automobile, hi-fi set, split-level home, kitchen equipment. He was basically describing how consumer capitalism doesn't just sell us things, it sells us versions of ourselves. Marcuse believed that advanced industrial society creates what he called false needs. So desires that feel authentic but are actually manufactured to keep the system running. So we think we are expressing our individuality when we choose between iPhone and Android. But both choices keep us locked in the same system of surveillance and control. This insight is staggering when applied to our digital world. We think we are connecting with friends on social media, but we are actually feeding data to algorithms. We think we are discovering new music on Spotify, but we are being molded into profitable listening patterns. We think we are learning from search engines, but we are being shaped by information bubbles. Marcuse's point was that this kind of society doesn't need to use force to control people. It controls them by making them want what the system needs them to want. It's a kind of comfortable totalitarianism. So soft, seductive, and seemingly voluntary. But here's what makes this particularly disturbing from an ethical standpoint. When we become so identified with our digital selves, so our profiles, our feeds, our online personas, we lose touch with what Marcuse called our authentic needs. We stop asking what would actually make us flourish as human beings. So if our desires themselves are being manufactured, how can we ever make truly free choices? If our very sense of self is being algorithmically constructed, what's left of human agency? This isn't just about privacy anymore. It's about the possibility of authentic human existence in a world where authenticity itself has become a marketable commodity. I don't think there are easy answers in this problem, and I'm not going to pretend there are. Recognizing these problems is the first step toward reclaiming some measure of agency. When we understand how consent is being manipulated, how power is being concentrated, and how we are being instrumentalized, we can at least begin to resist. Maybe the resistance looks like choosing different technologies. Maybe it's supporting legislation that actually protects privacy. Maybe it's simply slowing down and asking yourself, what do I actually need from this digital world? And what is it taking from me in return? The deeper question isn't really whether tech companies owe us privacy. It's whether we owe it to ourselves to remember what it means to be human in a world that profits from our forgetting. The conversation about digital privacy isn't really about technology at all. It's about what kind of world we want to live in and what kind of people we want to be. Those are questions only you can answer, but they are questions worth asking. And speaking of questions worth asking, in my last video I explored something that might surprise you. We all chase happiness, but what if that very pursuit is actually the thing making us miserable? If you are curious about why the happiness trap might be keeping you stuck and what are the alternatives, check out that video next. It might just change how you think about the good life entirely. And for now, thank you for watching till the end. If you like this video, consider subscribing and liking and perhaps commenting. Thanks once again, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.